12:23. Okay, so I'm placing you under arrest under suspicion of fraud.
Of what?
False representation, okay? So
False representation of
the
what?
circumstances are you're using your husband's card without permission to make purchases, okay? So you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you're not mentioned when questioned, something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
Just going to
Okay, so, I am placing you under arrest under suspicion of fraud by false representation. The circumstances are that you are using your husband's card without permission to make purchases. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. The caution is standard, a rhythmic procedural incantation that police officers recite thousands of times in a career. But in this specific instance, on a quiet street in Canterbury, the words hang heavy in the air, masking a much darker reality. The officers standing at the door of the shared house on St. Frace, Martins's Road believe they are dealing with a financial crime, a spouse spending money that is not hers. But just a few yards away, beneath the manicured greenery of an English summer garden, lies a secret that will shatter the facade of this historic city. A flashback to a few weeks prior. She stands in the garden on a warm summer evening, watching with a calm, practiced detachment, as the hired gardener rakes fresh grass cuttings into neat, aromatic piles. The air smells of cut chlorophyll and damp earth, the quintessential scent of British suburbia. Her voice is level, almost pleasant, as she issues a specific instruction: leave the clippings right there, piled high under the greenery at the very bottom of the garden. The gardener, wiping sweat from his brow, nods and complies. It seems like such an ordinary request on such an ordinary day. He has no reason to suspect that he is an unwitting accomplice in a macabre burial. Beneath those innocent grass cuttings, wrapped in layers of black bin bags, and stuffed inside a heavy canvas holdall, lies the body of her husband. This is the story of Maureen Rickards, a 50-year-old woman who murdered her husband, Jeremy, and then attempted to gaslight the world into believing he had simply vanished to the Middle East. But what you're about to hear is not merely a story of murder. It is a story of profound manipulation. It forces us to confront a terrifying question. How many warning signs do we miss, simply because the perpetrator looks so remarkably ordinary? Maureen Rickards was born in April 1974. To the casual observer, she was a fixture of modern Britain, navigating the cobbled streets and medieval architecture of Canterbury, a city steeped in history and religious significance. Canterbury is a place of tourists, students, and quiet respectability, where violent crime feels like an intrusion from another world. Maureen blended in perfectly. She was middle-aged, living in a shared house, and had been married to Jeremy Rickards for 27 years. On the surface, a marriage spanning nearly 3 decades suggests stability, a partnership that has weathered the storms of life. But surfaces are often treacherous. Behind the closed doors of their home, Maureen was not the partner she appeared to be. She was, according to prosecutors and the forensic psychologists, who later pieced together the fragments of their life, a woman capable of sustained, calculated cruelty. She was a controller, an abuser who ruled her husband through fear, and when that control was threatened, she became a killer. What drives someone to become an abuser? Psychologists and criminologists tell us that domestic violence is rarely about a single, explosive moment of uncontrollable rage. It is almost always about power. The intoxicating need to dominate and control another human being. It often begins subtly, like a hairline fracture in a dam. A sharp word here, a dismissive comment there, a gradual isolation from friends and family. The abuser learns that aggression works, that it silences dissent, and keeps their victim compliant. Over time, the volume is turned up, and the victim's world shrinks until it fits entirely inside the abuser's fist. In some truly disturbing cases, the abuser may even record their own acts of violence. This is not done out of remorse or a desire to seek help, but as a twisted form of validation, or a tool for future blackmail. Maureen Rickards did exactly that. She documented her cruelty, capturing the moments where she stripped her husband of his dignity. She was 50 years old when she killed him, having spent nearly 3 decades as his wife. Yet, instead of building a life based on mutual respect and care, the golden years that couples often look forward to, she had created a prison for Jeremy. It was a domestic gulag, where he was constantly afraid, constantly hurt, and ultimately, fatally trapped. Jeremy Rickards was 65 years old when he died. He was a man who had lived a full and varied life, a professional geologist who understood the deep time of the Earth. He spent his career studying the slow processes that shape landscapes over millennia, the pressure, the heat, the gradual shifts of tectonic plates, but tragically, he could not predict the slow erosion of his own safety, the gradual collapse of his world under the weight of his wife's escalating violence. In the photographs shared by his family, he appears gentle, perhaps a little weary, with the kind of face that suggests kindness and patience. He was not a physically imposing man, which perhaps made him an easier target for Maureen's bullying. Jeremy had a daughter, Chima, from a previous relationship. He loved her deeply and tried to maintain contact, even as his life with Maureen became a minefield. Chima would later play a crucial role in uncovering the truth of her father's disappearance, acting as the tenacious force that refused to accept Maureen's lies. But in the months leading up to his death, Chima was kept at a painful distance. Maureen controlled the flow of information with practiced ease, feeding Jeremy's family lies and half-truths to ensure they remained unaware of the horror unfolding behind closed doors. This isolation is a hallmark of coercive control, but for male victims, there is an added layer of complexity: shame. Society often struggles to view men as victims of female violence. There is a stigma, a fear of not being believed, or worse, being ridiculed. Jeremy likely felt this acutely. He was a quiet man who kept to himself, always polite to neighbors, always willing to exchange a pleasantry, but behind that polite exterior his identity was being dismantled piece by piece. Maureen did not just hurt him physically, she eroded his belief that he deserved anything better, or that anyone would help him if he tried to leave. For Jeremy, the local Wetherspoons pub in Canterbury was more than just a place to get a drink. It was a sanctuary. It was a neutral ground. A few precious square feet of space where the tension of his home life could not reach him. He was a regular there, a quiet presence who would nurse a pint and perhaps find a brief respite from the shouting and the fear. But the sanctuary began to crack in mid-May 2024. A member of the bar staff, used to seeing Jeremy's polite, weary face, noticed something deeply troubling. Jeremy had visible, angry bruising on his face, dark purple marks blooming around his eyes and ears, and a nasty, jagged cut on his forehead. When the staff member gently asked what had happened, Jeremy offered a simple, unconvincing explanation: he had been in a car accident. It was the kind of lie that victims of domestic abuse have rehearsed 1,000 times. It is designed to shut down inquiry, to offer a plausible enough reason that allows the questioner to back away without feeling guilty. The staff member accepted the answer, perhaps because it was easier than pressing further, or perhaps because Jeremy's body language screamed that he did not want to talk about it. But there had been no car accident. The wreckage was not metal and glass. It was the result of violence inflicted by the woman he had slept beside for 27 years. In the weeks that followed, the walls of the shared property on St. Martin's Road became witnesses to a rapidly deteriorating situation. Housemates began to notice the undeniable signs of escalation. Living in a shared house usually offers some level of protection, the presence of others acting as a deterrent. But Maureen's rage had seemingly bypassed the fear of being heard. Housemates heard the distinct, sickening sounds of shouting and hitting coming from the couple's room. They saw Jeremy emerging from that room looking increasingly frail, frightened, and broken. One housemate would later tell police that Jeremy had confided in him, whispering that he was terrified of Maureen, that her anger was becoming unmanageable. Another recalled seeing Jeremy so badly beaten that he looked as though he had gone 12 rounds in a brutal, unlicensed boxing match. These were not minor domestic squabbles. These were red flags waving frantically in the wind. But Jeremy, paralyzed by the unique psychological grip of his abuser, did not reach out for official help. The last confirmed sighting of Jeremy Rickards alive was on the 7th of June 2024. On that day, he topped up his mobile phone, a small, mundane routine that anchors a person to the modern world. It would become a crucial piece of evidence, marking the last moment he existed as a free man. After that, his phone went silent. His bank card stopped moving with him. The exact moment the abuse turned to murder is estimated between the 8th and 26th of June. The medical evidence tells us that this was not an accidental push or a single moment of regretful lashing out. Jeremy was stabbed 5 times in the chest. 2 of those blades pierced his heart, injuries that are catastrophic and rapidly fatal. The weapon, a knife or blade, has never been found. Despite extensive searches, stabbing is a peculiarly intimate form of murder. Unlike a gun, which allows for distance, a knife requires the killer to be close enough to touch the victim, close enough to feel the life leaving them. 5 times. Each strike was a conscious decision to ensure that Jeremy Rickards would never leave that room alive. With Jeremy dead, the immediate explosion of violence gave way to a cold, calculated pragmatism. Maureen Rickards was now faced with a problem that has undone killers throughout history: the physical reality of a human body. She could not simply leave him on the floor, not if she wanted to maintain the charade of normalcy she was planning, and so she set about hiding the evidence of her crime with a chilling efficiency. Her first solution was temporary and desperate. She moved Jeremy's body into a cupboard in her bedroom. This was not a spacious walk-in wardrobe. It was a confined space, and fitting the dead weight of a grown man inside would have required immense physical effort and gruesome manipulation. But hide him she did. However, biology is relentless. As the summer heat of June warmed the house, the natural processes of death began. Pools of blood and bodily fluids began to seep from the cupboard, soaking through the floorboards and eventually staining the ceiling of the flat below. It was a macabre hourglass, the physical evidence of the murder literally dripping through the architecture of the house. To the human nose, the smell would soon become undeniable, but to nature's scavengers, it was a beacon. This is where the science of forensic entomology becomes crucial to the investigation. Flies, particularly blowflies, have an uncanny ability to detect death almost immediately, often arriving within minutes of the heart stopping. They lay their eggs in natural openings or wounds, and the life cycle of the resulting larvae maggots follows a precise biological clock. Later, experts would analyze the insect activity on Jeremy's body to turn back the clock and determine exactly how long he had been dead. Their findings confirmed that Jeremy had lain in that cupboard for a significant time, his body becoming a nursery for insects while Maureen slept just feet away. Realizing that the cupboard was becoming a liability, likely due to the smell and the leaking fluids, Maureen decided to move him again. She purchased heavy-duty black bin bags, the kind used for household rubbish, and wrapped her husband's body like refuse. She then stuffed the bundle into a large canvas holdall. Under the cover of darkness, she dragged or carried this heavy load down the stairs and out into the garden. One housemate later recalled hearing the sound of something heavy being moved in the dead of night. A thudding, dragging noise that seemed odd at the time but would later take on a sinister significance. She placed the holdall at the bottom of the garden, beneath the cover of dense bushes. But simply dumping him was not enough. She needed camouflage. This brings us back to that surreal interaction with the gardener on the 26th of June. When Maureen asked him to pile the fresh grass cuttings over the bushes, she was not just being tidy. She was using the organic matter to create a compost heap over her husband. A layer of vegetation designed to mask the sight of the bag and the smell of decomposition. It was a masterclass in improvisation, a frantic attempt to keep her secret buried just a little longer. Even as she worked to physically conceal her husband beneath the garden waste, Maureen was simultaneously engaged in a different kind of burial. A digital one. In the modern age, a person is more than just flesh and blood. They are a collection of data points, bank transactions, and digital communications. To get away with murder, one must manage the victim's digital ghost. Maureen understood this, or at least, she tried to. On the 27th of June, she picked up Jeremy's mobile phone, the same phone he had topped up just before vanishing, and began to type. She sent a text message to herself and to Jeremy's daughter, Chima. The message was a fabrication designed to explain his sudden absence. It claimed that Jeremy had traveled to Saudi Arabia for work. It was a bold, perhaps desperate lie. Saudi Arabia is far enough away to explain a lack of physical contact, yet plausible enough in a globalized world. Maureen was buying time. If people believed Jeremy was thousands of miles away in the Middle East, they would not come knocking on the door in Canterbury. They would not notice the silence in the house or the smell in the garden. For a brief moment, Maureen could continue to live in the house, using Jeremy's bank card to fund her daily life, as though nothing had happened. But lies are fragile structures, and Maureen overplayed her hand. The following day, on the 28th of June, she sent another message from Jeremy's phone. This one was far darker and designed to shut down all future inquiries permanently. The text claimed that Jeremy had taken his own life while in Saudi Arabia. It was a shocking, brutal statement, intended to paralyze the family with grief and stop them from asking questions. But it had the exact opposite effect. Chima, Jeremy's daughter, froze when she read the message. She knew her father. She knew his voice, his mannerisms, and his character. The text did not sound like him. The sudden escalation from working abroad to suicide in the space of 24 hours did not fit the man she knew. Instead of accepting the narrative and grieving quietly, Chima's intuition screamed that something was wrong. She did not accept the digital lie. She contacted the police and reported him missing. That phone call set in motion the gears of the investigation that would ultimately dismantle Maureen's deception. While the police began their inquiries, Maureen was busy trying to scrub the physical evidence from her home. Between the 20th and 30th of June, while her husband's body lay decomposing, she used his bank card to go shopping in Canterbury. CCTV footage from local shops captured her wandering the aisles, pushing a trolley, filled with the mundane and the sinister. She bought bleach, heavy-duty detergent, and various cleaning products, the classic toolkit of the amateur forensic cleaner. Back at the house on St. Martin's Road, she got to work on the carpet in their bedroom, frantically scrubbing at the stains left by the man she had murdered. But forensic science is unforgiving. Blood is a biological substance that is notoriously difficult to erase completely. It seeps into fibers, soaks into underlay, and leaves microscopic traces even after being bleached. Despite Maureen's frantic scrubbing, despite the gallons of chemical she poured onto the floor, the evidence remained. When investigators eventually peeled back the layers of her story, they would also peel back the carpet, revealing the indelible truth of what had happened in that room. The bleach could clean the surface, but it could not wash away the crime. On the 11th of July 2024, the police arrived at the house on St. Martin's Road. They did not come with sirens blaring or weapons drawn for a siege. They came with the paperwork for a financial crime. The officers were there to arrest Maureen Rickards on suspicion of fraud. The bank card activity had raised flags, a missing man's money being spent on household goods in local shops, and the police intended to question her about these transactions. But the moment the front door opened, the investigation shifted instantly from white-collar fraud to something visceral and horrific. It was the smell that hit them first. Officers described it later as a thick, cloying odor that seemed to cling to the back of the throat. It is a scent that, once smelled, is never forgotten. The sweetness of rot, the undeniable chemical signature of decomposing organic matter. In the heat of July, inside a house that had been closed up, the air was heavy with it. The officers exchanged glances. They knew immediately that they were no longer looking for a fraudster. They were looking for a corpse. They began a systematic search of the property, moving through the rooms where Jeremy had lived in fear. The trail of the scent led them through the house and out the back door, into the garden where Maureen had stood watching the gardener just weeks before. The garden was overgrown in places, a patch of green in the city, but the officers' attention was drawn to the bottom of the yard, to the pile of grass cuttings and bushes that looked too deliberate, too heaped. Beneath the vegetation they found the heavy canvas holdall. When they carefully opened the bag, cutting through the layers of black plastic bin liners, their worst fears were confirmed. Inside was the body of Jeremy Rickards. The decomposition was advanced, accelerated by the summer temperatures and the plastic wrapping, which had trapped the heat. It was a grim discovery. The final resting place of a man who had been discarded like garden waste. When the officers returned to Maureen to arrest her, this time on suspicion of murder, her reaction was a masterclass in feigned ignorance. "What body?" she asked, her voice rising in a performance of bewilderment. When the officer clarified that she was being detained for murder, she repeated the word with theatrical incredulity. "Murder, murder." She acted as though the police had just spoken in a foreign language, as though the idea of violence was completely alien to her. But the performance crumbled under the weight of the reality in the garden. The smell was on her clothes, the blood was on her carpet, and the body was in her holdall. The subsequent post-mortem examination stripped away any remaining doubt about the nature of their relationship. The pathologist found the 5 fatal stab wounds to the chest, but they also found a roadmap of historical pain. Jeremy's body bore the scars of a long, silent war. There were strangulation marks on his neck from previous assaults, fractures to his ribs that had started to heal, and a constellation of bruises and cuts in various stages of fading. The autopsy revealed that Jeremy had not just died, he had been tortured over months. The knife was simply the final punctuation mark in a sentence of suffering that had lasted for years. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. In March 2025, Maureen Rickards stood in the dock at Canterbury Crown Court, facing the consequences of her actions. The trial, lasting 2 weeks, was a public unveiling of the private hell she had created for Jeremy. The prosecution, led by senior lawyers from the Crown Prosecution Service, did not just rely on the forensic evidence of the body in the garden. They played the jury, the very recordings Maureen had made herself. In a twist that speaks to the arrogance of the abuser, Maureen had used her mobile phone to film herself berating, striking and threatening to kill Jeremy. The court watched in silence as the digital ghost of Jeremy Rickards appeared on screen, cowering before the camera, while Maureen's voice, spiteful and controlling, filled the courtroom. In one video, she explicitly threatened to end his life. These were not the actions of a woman acting in self-defense or a momentary lapse of reason. They were the receipts of a calculated campaign of terror. Maureen's defense, a bizarre claim that she was being framed by spooky forces and conspiracies, collapsed under the weight of her own digital footprint. On March 13, 2025, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty. Maureen did not weep, she did not scream. She maintained the same detached, stony demeanor she had worn since her arrest. Sentencing followed on April 9. Mr. Justice Kerr, presiding, did not mince words. He addressed the empty chair where Maureen should have been. She refused to attend her own sentencing, and delivered a condemnation that echoed beyond the courtroom walls. "I accept you loved him," he said, acknowledging the twisted complexity of abusive relationships, "but I do not know why you killed him. You have shown no remorse." He spoke of the desecration of Jeremy's body, the ultimate indignity of treating a husband like refuse to be composted. Maureen was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 22 years. She will be an old woman of 72 before she can even ask for freedom. But the end of the trial is not the end of the story. The death of Jeremy Rickards leaves us with uncomfortable questions. Jeremy was a geologist, a father, a man of science and intellect. He does not fit the stereotypical image of a battered spouse, and that is precisely why his story matters. It reminds us that domestic abuse is a shapeshifter. It ignores gender, age, and social standing. Male victims, in particular, face a towering wall of silence, a cultural barrier built of shame and the fear of being seen as weak. Jeremy's bruises were visible to the world in that local pub, yet the intervention never came. This case must serve as a wake-up call. If there is a lesson to be salvaged from this tragedy, it is that we must look closer. We must challenge the instinct to look away when we see a friend with an unexplained injury, or a neighbor who has become withdrawn. We need to create a world where a man like Jeremy feels safe enough to say, "I am scared," and know that he will be believed. If this story has affected you, or if you recognize these patterns in your own life or the life of someone you know, do not stay silent. In the UK, the National Domestic Abuse Helpline is open 24/7 at 0808 2000 247. For men specifically, the Men's Advice Line is a lifeline at 0808 8010 327. There is help, and there is a way out. Thank you for watching this difficult case with us. We share these stories not to dwell on the darkness, but to shine a light on the things we often miss until it is too late. Please like, subscribe, and share this video not for the algorithm, but because the more people who know the signs, the fewer people will have to suffer in silence. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.